Well, when I saw this thing sitting around, looking the way it looked, kind of scratched up and sad looking, I couldn't say no. And it turns out this is a Technics stereographic equalizer, model SH-8046. And it's kind of neat because over here in the corner it says it proudly proclaims itself to be a computer equalizer. Now, like a lot of pieces of stereo equipment that say computer on them and only have something that would meet the definition of a computer in a very permissible consideration, i.e. a simple logic circuit or something like this, Technics Panasonic was telling the truth here. This thing actually is a computer-driven stereo equalizer, which is kind of neat. Just to show you how far we've come, this thing was manufactured in the middle of 1986, and that is, although it says Technics on it, that is a 4-bit Hitachi microcontroller intended mainly for use in car audio applications. And then, of course, on the board, you have the actual components that make the equalizer itself work. For the left and right channels, you have two Sanyo LC7522, 7-band with a 12 decibel boost or cut, equalizer chips with a serial input, and then you have a Toshiba 16-switch analog switching IC, which is probably used in this application to set up things like switching in the equalizer record, picking what source you're going to listen to, and engaging the tape monitor mode. And the microcontroller over here drives all of those things. But perhaps the coolest thing about this thing, if you don't really care about the internals of it, is the way that it works. You have this vacuum fluorescent display over here that has multiple purposes. This thing can actually do different kinds of things depending on what you ask it to do. For example, you can have it display the equalizer, or you can have it display a spectrum analyzer, which moves up and down according to the various frequencies and their intensity within the musical program. And of course, you can do other interesting things. Since this is microcontroller driven, you can have some station memories. You can have equalizer memories and such that at the push of a button you can define. And I've made these silly examples in its memory. You really wouldn't want to equalize something like that in real life, but they go to serve the point of my illustration here, and that's the fact that you can save these presets in its memory, up to 4 of them, and it will remember them and apply them immediately when you hit the preset memory buttons. Now, this thing works just fine, but it was a little bit scuffed up and roughed up. I think it's had some rough times in its life, but that doesn't seem to have bothered it too much. Interestingly, it uses the exact same chassis as the SA-929 stereo receiver that I found. This bottom plate is exactly identical and just has the various mounting points and stuff in it, depending on whatever it is they were going to build. The way you adjust the equalizer is pretty darn cool. I don't know who dreamed this up, but it's a neat idea. It's touch sensitive. And the band that you're currently adjusting shows up in double intensity. Now, sometimes the adjustment is a little touchy, especially if you have big fat fingers like I do. But you don't have to slide your finger up and down the whole control. You can just touch the amount of adjustment you want to make, and it instantly goes there. You can also run your fingers across it diagonally and adjust them that way, however you want to do it, which is pretty darn cool. They don't make audio equipment like this today, and it's unfortunate that they don't. It has some other neat tricks that it can do, like if you call up one of these memory presets or you set the equalizer and you immediately want to invert it, you can press the reverse button on the front panel and it flips it, and also lights up an indicator to indicate that it's doing that. You can also, if you like, say you customize your equalization the way you want it and you don't want to accidentally brush into this panel, you can lock it out. And it'll make the movements. Well, I didn't get it locked. There we go. You can make the movements and it'll act like it's going to do it, but it won't actually respond. Now, whoever programmed the firmware for this thing and its little microcontroller was actually seemingly a pretty thoughtful person or a group of people or whatever, because although there's only one display, you can adjust both channels separately. For example, You can adjust the left channel all by itself. Make your adjustments however you want them. And then you can adjust the right channel all by itself. Now if you opt to display both channels at once, the display is equipped to do that too. If you select both left and right, it indicates the selection points, but it indicates them in varying intensity. The left set points are brighter than the right ones, and that's also indicated over here in the left and right indicators. But like I say, this thing was handled a little bit roughly, and so it definitely needs some help. And if you go ahead and normalize, if you're adjusting left and right both at once, then the intensity of the left and right indicators turns the same, and the intensity of the bars is the same as well. But like I was saying, this thing needs a little bit of help because it's had a rough life, and some of the buttons on the front, they work, they engage their functions, but their little LED indicator lights don't always come on. For example, you can choose the tape monitor or the source here, so you can control what you're listening to and possibly also what you're equalizing. Well, you can hit the tape button, but the little light never comes on. But if I go around back here and play with the circuit board, you can see that occasionally I can get it to come on. So clearly there's some bad solder joints. There's also a bad solder joint here on the EQ recording control, which lets you switch the equalizer in to the signal that you'd be recording to your tape deck. So, this is another episode of Kitchen Table Electronics Repair in a way too. It is interesting in a way that the central microcontroller has so many pins. My guess is that the very most of them go to the front panel where the buttons on the display are, as well as the sliding touch-sensitive panel, because everything else in here is done over a serial bus between the microcontroller and the chips. That is to say, if the microcontroller wants to change the 1 kilohertz audio band by making it by increasing its level compared to all the others, all it has to do is send an appropriate bit stream to the appropriate equalizer IC, depending on whether you're adjusting the left, right, or both channels. And the same is true of this input switch over here, this analog switch. Now, all this thing ought to need to be repaired is a little touch-up of the solder on these LEDs. I looked at these two over here, the ones that seem to be non-functional, or at least unreliably functional, and they definitely have cracks around them. So I don't know if someone was hitting the front panel on this thing, or what was going on with it. But they definitely need some attention. So as soon as the soldering iron has warmed up over here, I'll give them the attention that they're looking for, and hopefully reliable operation will be restored. This thing does remember its equalization settings when it's unplugged, as well as the memory presets, but it doesn't have a non-volatile memory. Instead, there are these two large electrolytic capacitors here that appear to be used to keep the microcontroller's memory running when the power is unplugged. I have seen it mentioned on an internet forum that pulling the plug on this thing, or actually it was another YouTube video because there's a couple around about this thing, it seems that if you pull the plug with the equalizer turned on, you'll lose all your presets and everything because the capacitors discharge immediately. I have no idea who made that nifty vacuum fluorescent display because the back of it is covered up with a backing plate, and I have no intention of risking disaster with it by pulling it off and trying to break the panel just to see who made it. Alright, here we are after a little bit of resoldering. Those indicator lights now work like they should. So I reckon I'll put this thing back together, and I'll put it over at the Roach Palace in the stereo stack with the SA-929 receiver. It should be a perfect match. It's the same color and roughly the same vintage, about a year older, I think. But there you have it, the Technics Stereographic Equalizer SH-8046 and a little bit of kitchen table electronics repair to go with it.